try to get the barriers down. I don't want any authorizations for the first 15th visit. That's a cost there. A person on the phone or this and that, or your people, that's a cost there. Even if I can't get a monetary value off of the eval visit or the follow-up visit or the reval, just decrease the barriers to care, because I want to see your patient faster, because that's in their best interest. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Daniel Vapne, PT, who is a Director of Clinical Operations and Growth at Advantage Physical Therapy in New York. Paul and Daniel talk through the asymmetry of information in healthcare, how to negotiate with third-party payers, and the power of data when making business decisions. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
You're the first dude I've met that seems to be like extremely aligned with the way we think about transparency and all that stuff. And I guess I'm just personal question, like why, like how'd you end up like that? Like it seems like most, and I mean this with all the respect in the world, most clinicians turned into non-business role. Like they can't shed that whole like clinical mindset of whatever, but you seem to have like a entrepreneurial kind of bend to you. I mean, was that always the case out of curiosity?
Background, both my parents are immigrants. My sister's an immigrant. I was the first person in my family born here of all of my cousins. My parents haven't, they still speak not the best English, but everyone is an entrepreneur in my family, right? So My sister lives in San Antonio. She's in real estate. She has a brokerage, a lot of agents. My mom is a piano teacher. My dad's an engineer, an inspector. Did a lot of projects, been taken advantage of because they don't know like the nuances, the legality of stuff, right? So just good people. I always had that itch in college. I did a startup with my fraternity brothers in college. They kept running with it. I liked helping people in healthcare, had a lot of good opportunities there. It was great, and went to PT school after I worked for the Israeli team for the 2016 Olympics and a few other things there. And then went to PT school, joined a hospital-based practice, learned a lot about billing there. And then when we moved to New York and I had to part ways with them because my wife was like, all right, they don't have a place in New York. You're not driving to Jersey. My friend bought a practice during COVID and I linked up with him. And then I saw what everyone else had to deal with. And it was like, well, people were paying me to visit to see me. And and now they're paying $60 a visit to see me. This stuff. The
math ain't mathin'.
Yeah. So I was just like, what is going on here? And so I started getting some background and I was just like, listen, it's not good that people are paying $600, right, for PT. And like you could get the same service, if not better service or worse service somewhere, but like the financials weren't mathing there. And so I started trying to either create a hospital partnership here or find a way to change things. And in like 5 months, I did that. I feel like we should be getting this, but unfortunately, we're not.
That's super cool, man. By the way, I have a feeling it's safe to say we're definitely doing another episode or 3. Because this is going to be good. So a little bit of background, I'm sure Thomas shared some of it with you, is like, we're not from healthcare. I come from the tech world. My parents were immigrants too, and they wouldn't describe themselves as entrepreneurs, but I think, immigrating from a place like India where it really was a one-way street, back in the late 70s, early 80s, you kind of had to have an entrepreneurial bend, a certain tolerance of risk to make a leap like that because there was no safety net. I won't bore you with the details, but I just spent my career just sort of building stuff. And then when my wife and I were expecting we have 4 kids now, but I think when we were expecting our second is when I finally started discovering, I was like noticing these like free postcards that like all these marketers were just hitting her up hard. Once they had tagged her as expecting, like, I'm like, free breast pump. nothing's free. What in the world? What is this? And that's what got me exposed to the shady world of revenue cycle management and margin, the billing margin. I was like, what in the world? And so one thing led to another. I came over here and I was like, okay, what does it look like? So anyway, I'm 2 years into the role here. And, it's just kind of been like, I come from the tech world where everything is transparent, data is shared, APIs are two-way. And I come here and I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Anyway, it's just been very, very fascinating. And then, and we'll talk about this when we start the show, the show itself, but like, then you start to discover like lots of little things. Like, for example, that one you commented on one of my posts this morning where it's like, I can't tell you how many times I hear people ask me like where they can find more data on like whether they're getting paid the right amount on the contract they have with the payer. And in my mind, I'm like, the FTC, for example, a long time ago said that like you can't hide your prices. Like, generally speaking, by the way, I believe from a legal standpoint, the way it's actually written is for consumer-based things, the law requires full transparency. So like patients are allowed, that's why they get EOBs. I mean, you know this stuff, right? The law does not similarly protect customers of B2B companies, which technically the relationship is. So it's not like anybody's doing anything illegal. It's just that there's no federal guidelines that require everybody to have, transparency and price for the customer. So anyway, just really fascinating. And so, yeah, we just recorded an episode with Justin Stiver there that's going to come out here soon where I think I caught him on a bad day where he had asked a question on an APTA email list and immediately got squashed. And somebody at APTA told him like, you're not allowed to talk about this on our email server. And he got on this podcast with us. And I was like, I can bleep out their name if you want. He's like, no, fuck it. Leave it in. We're going to burn them down. I'm like, okay, this is going to be great.
I think we're all on the same boat. Anyway, like it doesn't make sense that like now we know that census data is like the average age of American seniors. We're not living as long. So like, why is Medicare reimbursement going down still when they're not living as long? So we're having less seniors now too, right? Where like the average age went down by like 1.8 years or like 2 years. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. We're starting to, we're going to have less soon. So eventually it has to go the other way, right? Like we're going to have less seniors soon. No one's talking about that either. It's like, why is it going to constantly trend down? Eventually the pendulum has to swing the other way, right? Like if there's 30 million seniors and then we have 22 million, like that doesn't make sense either. So
yep. I think it's like, and this is why I kind of like, in all seriousness, like think we're going to be talking a lot about this. And I would love to get you on a couple episodes here too, because I think that, these conversations, okay, so I have this belief, I have no way to prove this, but I think that the healthcare industry, like this topic we're talking about in terms of transparency or lack thereof, the healthcare industry in 2024 has this asymmetry of information that existed in the tech world 20 years ago. What ended up happening through the power of the internet, particularly back then through blogging at first, like because before video, right? People had blogs. That was like a huge thing.
Right.
And the rise of blogs started to like slowly chip away at this asymmetry. People would blog and they'd be like, I talked to this investor and she hurt my business this way. Before that, nobody ever knew like things like that were happening in back rooms, And so like, then you had blogging, then social media, then video, right? And so then even more social media with TikTok. So I think the fact is like, I don't think it's going to take 10, 20 years for healthcare to become as transparent because all the foundational communication tools are now there. What it does require, though, is more highlighting of conversations like this, people like you and thoughts like that, to maybe empower even more people to say stuff, to talk about what they're already talking about at private dinner tables rather than, whatever. So,
yeah, you're absolutely right.
Just in the short time I've gotten to hear you talk, I really love the way you sort of kind of frame these ideas. So in the pre-interview, you said something that is basically like you're a big believer in building in public and you want there to be more transparency in the field. Can you just expand on that? Let's use that as a starting point because I think that's going to be a great segue into talking about third-party payers and stuff like that. So when you say you want to be there to be more transparency in this industry or this field, what does that mean to you? Or what does that mean?
It's kind of crazy. Everyone's in the same business and we're all getting paid differently, right? So how your premium dollars are being spent is very different. Where like as you as a healthcare consumer, if you choose to go to someone that you really enjoy, even though you like that service, they might not get paid as much as this corporate institution, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't set up good practices as a whole, as a profession, right? Where like one guy can get paid one thing from the same entity, right? Whether it's a third party payer, right? Like there's a premium for like excellence, right? But if you're not achieving that, then like there's like you shouldn't be paid that premium. And what we
Yeah.
know now, because of a law that was passed recently, actually, and I like wrote this down, there was a law called the Healthcare Price Transparency Act 2.0, right? Also
Yep.
known
Yep.
as S.354448. It's a bill that aims to improve healthcare price transparency. Fantastic, right? And it made it so that hospitals and also payers had to put in the like 300 shoppable services by 2023. So you should know what 97110 is in terms of like PT or OT, get reimbursed by now, right? And all services will have to be publishable by 2025. All right. So
Yep.
if you want to get access to this file now, even though this bill exists, it's not, no one can really just see it, right? You have to like go through the weeds, or you might need to go on a website and find this .json file, right? Are you?
JSON. Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. So
structured data. Yep.
yeah. So these are like machine readable files where like you as a consumer, it's so much data, you can't just pop it into your Excel sheet and like code through it, but there's software that it exists for it, right? And it's fascinating, right? Because now I'm a part of this group of practices in New York and New Jersey, and we're like we're trying to fight the fight for not only our businesses but for our friends and family, because we're part of these communities, right? we
Right.
we own practices that have been around for 20, 30 years, and what we're seeing, we're being gobbled up one way or the
Right.
other way, right? We
Right.
see insurance payers coming in and trying to do vertical integration by being the provider on one end and the payer, which is wild to me. And but then you also have these large health systems that are like, you're now our provider, right? And they're under a different taxonomy, right? It's funny that we haven't done this, or you haven't done this also as an EMR company, where you handle the billing also as an MSO, right? So as an MSO is a multi-specialty organization, right? So what does that mean? Is you're not just, that taxonomy isn't just physical therapy, or it might include occupational therapy too. It might include speech therapy. You might add dietitians or MDs because you also do physiatry. Now, when you add in more taxonomies, you get a bonus from these payers. How do I know this? Well, because that's what hospitals do. That's what these larger practices do. That's what these
Yep.
physician-owned practices do. They get a little bonus because it's like an all-in-one. It's like a wholesale Costco. But so you have these multi-specialty organizations, but a multi-specialty organization is not the provider, right? It has to be independent. It's not owned by the shareholder. That's different than an IPA. All right, an IPA is a independent, let's say, provider association, right?
Yep.
Historically physician, and they're risk-bearing entities that help doctors negotiate for like better rates, and they have processes, more admin work, and so that's different, right? An MSO is more like a third party. They help you with like maybe like payroll services, benefits, billing, contracting, right? These things, they help you with the administrative burden. But in IPA, these independent practices are all shareholders. They all have ownership. So there's a little legal nuance there. And then there's
Yep.
another entity, right, called the accountable care organizations. And those are like bigger, like hospitals, physician
Right.
practices for those, I think it's called federal qualified health centers. And they
Yep.
get paid more from federal dollars like Medicare, Medicaid,
Right.
because they're trying to do this value-based care thing. And
Right.
that's what I found out. And I was like, okay, me, Advantage Physical Therapy, Dan, right, cannot get the same thing as these larger players. That's not right. First of all, it's not
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But how can I, right? So I start problem solving it because I'm in my first year of owning a practice, right? I see these terrible rates. I'm like, I'm losing money seeing people I want to see because they pay premiums and they have co-pays and they want to see me, but their copay is basically what I'm getting reimbursed from the insurance company because of these awful contracting. I'm like, I'm not going to do this. So I start finding a solution, and seems like other people at the time in New York, Health First. I don't take them, so I'm gonna say it. Health
Sure.
First cut their rates from like somewhere in the 80s to like 50 flat rate. All these private practices are like, where this is going to sink us, especially in those that want see Medicaid population, because Health First is like a managed care organization, and they, I think, are more like they get money from the government, and it's more of model, like that's their
Yep.
model. And so my friends that own practices in like the Bronx and Brooklyn and this and that, where you see a lot more Medicaid, that's very big in New York, their revenues just got cut just by that because it's such a big part of their payer mix. And that's awful. It's so bad. But it affects a lot of other practices as 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 well here. So we created this private practice network, and we're trying to create our own IPA, but
Right.
that takes a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
You take
Yeah.
like 3 to 4 years to get a finished product there, Paul. And
Yeah.
so me being the millennial who's like, I can't wait. Like I start looking to see like, all right, can we join another one? Like,
Yeah.
can we just piggyback? And then I ran up to a startup who you've probably seen me like, post about on LinkedIn, Ziacare, right? And the one that we work with now. And they original mission was create a value proposition around women's health. And I was like, yes, I love this. Great. And so it goes around PT, lactation consultants, dietitians, right? Because why in the United States do we have lower outcomes for feminine care than our partners in the EU that are doing it more efficiently, right? So
Yeah.
the reason why is the midwife is, and so they try to create this midwife with all these professions here, and that's what's in the taxonomy, right? So lactation consultants, dietitian, PT, OT, and that's the original mission. And for 3 years, they were going around dietitians because it's easier. A lot of them, there's
Yeah.
only like 2 really CPT codes there. But now their focus after meeting me was, all right, PT and OT, and don't go around the solo practitioner. Like most dietitians are solo practitioners. There's not a lot of big like dietitian groups. It exists and they're great, but it's not as common, right? Private practices have been common for a while. Like it's existing infrastructure. We generate our own business. Like we don't have a hard time generating business. Referrals flood in, especially if you've been in business for over 10 plus years. Like people know you, they either like you or don't like you, but you must be doing something right if you're
Right. Right.
around that long, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just like, all right, show me like, show me what you got. And they negotiate pretty good rates and renegotiate even better rates, right? And they're still onboarding a lot of these private practices. And what we're trying to do is see how much we can cover in New York. Can we create enough of a provider network that these payers are like, oh, wow, can we create enough access points? Can we do that where we'll get a premium on top of that, right?
Yeah.
And yeah,
But
right.
so like, how does that, and this is personal curiosity. So like, and you can talk to me like a second grader and assuming, this is something you can talk about publicly, but like for a new provider or practice owner to join something like that, what's required of them? Is it sharing their data? Is it like, what does it practically look like so when you talk about, man, if the IPA could get bigger, then you'd have more,
Mhm.
that's the gist of what you're talking about. So face value, this is like a no-brainer, right? If I'm a practice owner, it's like, yeah, Dan, here you go. What do you need? So what needs to be provided if I was a practice owner? Is it access to the EMR and you're using an API to scrape out certain data? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so we've had to run into that, right? Because on one end, we're with an MSO, but on another end, we're also trying to create an IPA at the same time. Because at one end, the MSO can get us with the commercial insurances, great, and do eligibility checks. But the IPA is going to be more of like a nonprofit for the more of the Medicaid plans, showing that type of data. And what has to happen is each practice owner needs to sign a BAA, right? There needs to be processes set up where like I don't see my friend's private practice info too, right? So like
Yep.
different logins. There needs to be like checks and like balances in place.
Yep.
It was really hard. Like, how do you contract different providers when they're already contracted too?
Right.
So
Right.
we had to solve a lot of problems. The great thing about startups is they are ambitious, they are gun ho, and they love fixing problems. They love solving, and that's what these people at ZiaCare love doing, and they do it efficiently. In 1 month, they solve
Yep.
probably like 20 problems.
I mean,
crazy.
that's what business is, right? Especially for startups, is just you find a problem and you sort of bulldoze your way through it and you find the next one. That's how it goes.
Yeah.
So let's use this maybe to segue into a related topic. So, you kind of implicitly talk, we know what the elephant in the room, there's these third-party payers. And you sort of alluded to this already in terms of like having to negotiate with them and all that. So I can ask more pointed questions here, but let me just start maybe let's just start a high level view here. Let's pretend that somebody listening to this, whether they're in, I'm making this up, Missouri or New York or somewhere else, they're sitting there, they're listening to you, and now in their mind, they're thinking about the payer contracts they have right now. And if they wanted to begin uncovering this, or, thinking about like renegotiating, what does that look like? Because like, let me actually also say one other thing. I've been in the internet industry for like 20 plus years now. I'm 43 years old. I've been doing this for a long time. And, one of the narratives that, common mainstream people will have against tech is they'll say, oh, tech destroys jobs. Tech does this. It's always bad, right? But actually, if you take the optimistic viewpoint, technology fundamentally destroys all middlemen. It destroys all asymmetries of information. And then the example I use is like when I was growing up as an immigrant, we weren't poor, but we weren't rich. But, information was not a Google search away. You hoped that you lived in a neighborhood where somebody's parents down the street could afford the Encyclopedia Britannica so that you didn't have to ask your mom for a ride to the library, And so now, you fast forward to 2024 and you can Google nearly anything except for what is a fair payment. So I think this is why this conversation, I said in the pre-show, this is why I think these conversations are so valuable, because like the more we shine a light on these, the faster other providers, other practice owners will feel comfortable also coming out of the woodwork. So going back to the question, somebody sitting here listening in Missouri or New York or somewhere else, and they're like, God, I got these contracts. I got to do something about them, but I don't want to use middlemen. I don't want to use these contractors that promise me the world. What does renegotiating with a third-party payer look like? Obviously, it's a very easy topic to discuss, right, on a show, but yeah, I'm curious how you talk about this.
That's a great question, Paul. So I looked into that. Like the second I was like, all right, how can I do this? And I talked to like different companies that's their job, is that they do that. And we're talking to a few of them as a larger entity also, between like 50 private practices. And they say, oh, New York is tough. Like New York, like we're not, it's like you might see 18% change maybe, like, or 10% change. So like, that's not good enough for me. Like 10% is not good enough for
Yeah.
me. I want to get 20 to 50% of hospital rates, right? Like, like can I get that? And so how to do this? So I tried doing this. We have several tax IDs, all right? And so I was just like, I'm going to have one person try, and then I'm also going to try. It's not the best use of my time. I want to help patients. I want to see patients. I want to get them better. I want to help my staff get better. I want to like do all that stuff. But let me give it the good old college try. I did better than them. Like I did better than them. So they wanted to pay me 68, and this one insurance company on one tax ID, and then I tried, and at first she came back to 75, and I was just like, nope. And then I got 86, and I was just like, that's great. Like
It's
I
such an arbitrary number too, like 70, 86.
86, right? But it's because I said no. Like, but you also have to know, like, what is it on the other side, the payer side, right? What do they need to exist, right? Like, what does a payer need to exist in New York or New Jersey? Like they need to have providers. They need to have a network, right? They have to show that they have a network and that network is sound, right? They can provide enough access points to be compliant as an insurance company, right? We have to be compliant as healthcare professionals, right? I have to have a PT license. I have to do ethics. I have continuing ed. What do insurance companies need to have to be an insurance company? They have to have a certain amount of providers per zip code based on MSA, right? So that's like how many people within the square miles, or right? So like, do you need 10 doctors or do you need 50 doctors, right? Like what is good enough? That's when you know you have leverage, right? That's why in the middle of nowhere where the standard of living is lower, it makes more sense to open up a practice than in dense New York City or dense Jersey City or LA, all right? Because there's a density there and there's a lot more competition. There's more options, right? And if you're in New York, you don't know what the other practices are getting until now, because now they have this machine readable file and you can actually look it up and say like, what is their tax ID? Pop it in there. Oh, Aetna's paying them 400 a visit. Why am I
Yes.
taking 75 a visit, right?
Right.
That exists now. That
Yeah.
exists. There's no antitrust. Anyone can look it up.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. By the way, we should talk about this at some point, whether it's after show or here or whatever. But like, I would love to build this, like if it's already out there, let's just build the resource that exposes it all. But for anybody listening to this now, like, where should they go? Like, how do they go get this?
Yeah. So it depends where you want to look, right? So you can pull it up for the individual pair websites. Like I have it pulled up right now. And let's just say Blue Cross Blue Shield is going to be our person, right? Because so you can go to anthem.com/machine readable file /search. I'll put it, I'll send it to you, and you can look up based on the name of the company or based on tax ID and pull up what they're getting paid in a machine readable file. So, and these are those .jsno files that are very hard to read unless you have some nice software, and that's like the barrier there. But Paul, like, why don't you make an arm of Strata as an MSO? Like why don't you just do that?
Oh man, after this recording, I'm gonna have to have a word with my security and compliance guy. Make sure you haven't been reading my emails. But well, so first off, I love the specificity, and you're like, yeah, here's the URL. Let me spell it out for you. Like, I love this, and the reason I love this is not only are you super intelligent about it, but like the reality. I think the key thing that is, I hope one of the key things people take away listening to somebody like you talk about this is that the real barrier here is just getting started. Like I think if more people just saw this data, if they just, so we call them JSON files, JSON.
Mm-hmm.
So if more people, the key message I hope people take away from you, one of them hopefully is, if more people just saw these JSON files, they'd probably get worked up enough to really do something about this. Because it's almost easier to just paint the boogeyman as somebody over there that is doing bad things. Medicare is reducing this. It's easier to paint that picture. But man, if more people just looked at the JSON file and said, what the F? And then, now now you see what you've lost. I mean, from a psychological standpoint, there's a concept called loss aversion. So if I tell you you could make $20 more, you're less likely to go do something about it. But instead, if I say, look, you dropped $20, you're like, the emotional pain you feel at the loss of 20 is greater than the potential joy you feel knowing that 20 is already in your pocket. So anyway, I love that part. The second thing I would say is like, to your point about why aren't we an MSO? Look, I think in the long term, that is on the roadmap. I think the reality is, And by the way, this is not unique to us. If you look at almost every other major company in, let's call it direct to consumer, e-commerce, whatever, we call this the verticalization. And so a good example here, by the way, would be like in the e-commerce world, Dollar Shave Club. These guys built a multi-billion-dollar business, got acquired for multi-billion-dollar. And this is it's not a secret. It's actually open. As they grew, they started to acquire more and more of the manufacturing infrastructure so that A, their own margins got better, and B, they destroyed access to any other competitor to utilize those same factories in Asia. And that's kind of the same thing here. I think in the long term, like I said, technology destroys all middlemen. I see our business as more of a tech company that happens to be in the business of RCM and EMR and all these things. And so, yeah, it's just a natural thing. I don't know if this is inspiring or terrifying, but I think a big part, if you were to actually like go back and look at my internal notes to our team, I've got this manifesto that I wrote 2 years ago to the team. It's like 70 pages. And ultimately what it boils down to is that our entire mission is about making things transparent. So if we have the data, publish it. Obviously aggregate it away so that, one practice's info is not another practice's info. But the point is, give it away. Even if nobody uses us, you should still be able to benefit from this. Like, you should not be at a disadvantage. Like, I know some people will be like, Paul's not a capitalist. No, I think I'm a capitalist, but I also think that information should be free. And that practice owner in Missouri or New York or whatever, the decision to join us should not be related to their desire to see the information. So anyway, all that to say, in the long term, I think we're on a collision path for something like that. The funny thing, okay, this is going to be a little cynical. The funny thing, and I don't know if you would agree with me on this, a lot of practice owners I meet, it's like they become more cynical the longer they've been in practice ownership, right? Like, I was talking to one guy who's owned a practice for like 20 years, and I was like, so would you do it again? He's like, no way, absolutely not. Like, the margins are too thin or whatever. And that's his truth. I can't convince him otherwise, but I'm also an optimist. And I also know that two things can't be true at the same time. You can't believe that there's no margin in this industry while also agreeing that private equity as an industry sees so much value in this industry that they're rolling up practices. Both of those cannot be true. So I think it's really fascinating. And I actually think as a stepping stone to that, Emma. So I think, the shorter term thing that you've got my brain working on is like, what sort of crawlers can we build to begin crawling all these? See, like, we've already started publishing our payer data based on the actual claims going through our system. So if you go to our website, go on benchmarks, and you click on payers, if you pick the state, New York versus Florida, you'll actually see real data, including real CPT code combinations that made that payment happen. And I think longer term, what you've got me thinking about is like, we could build crawlers. I mean, look, this is a known problem from a technology standpoint. What is Google? A bunch of crawlers. What is OpenAI? A bunch of crawlers. Everything's a crawler. Let's go crawl the web, discover these PDFs and these JSON files, and try to build even more structured data around them. There's something there that could be kind of really interesting. So I want to be respectful of your time, and this might not be a fast question, so we can always like start it and then pick it up in the next episode. But so let's just use your practice to the extent you're willing to share. When you identify an opportunity, so like that example you used a few minutes ago, you said like, I got 75, they offered me X, I said no, then it was 86. Like, obviously you say that with the clarity of hindsight, that negotiation turned out in your favor. But when you're first approaching this, how do you start that conversation? So like, is it an email to somebody at the payer? Like, talk to me like a second grader. Once you've identified, like you yourself, like, oh, here's a problem, I'm not getting paid enough. What does that specifically look like? Email, a phone call? What does that look like?
They make it so hard. They make it so much friction, man. It's not just an email. No. You have to use their portal system. So for like Elevance Health, you can't even get a phone. You can't get a person on the phone. You have to go and you have to find the person for your geographic area, right? And you have to email them, and then they send you a portal to the secure email that's encrypted. That's very hard to get to. And you don't even know, you can't really see the exchange there. And then, oh my gosh, they made me, they said, oh, their provider network is not open. All right. I was like, okay, when is the time? Check back in 3 months. I checked back in 3 months, like on clockwork. I sent it again. They're like, nope, still not open. Sorry. I was just like, are you serious? I couldn't even get myself in network as the new therapist in this practice. I couldn't get myself on. I had to have another therapist co-sign for me for the first like 6 months. And I said, this is ridiculous. This contracting, credentialing thing, this is ridiculous in itself. So that was one of the benefit of the MSO. They have like delegated credentialing where like your credential, boom, you're in. That's it. And they took care of that entire process. When you're negotiating with a payer that will email you and get on the phone with you, amazing. On the phone, like selling, like physical therapists, what do? We sell the story, we sell the mission, right? And I told her what we do here, this and that, does not care. I was like, all right, so what do you care about, right? And then I figured out it's who can we serve? How big of the net can we take? Can we help bariatric people? All right, that's a bump. How fast can we get them in? Are we open nights and weekends? Or this and that, right? So all those little things that these contractors that want to negotiate me on my like behalf, like try to say, like, she didn't know that, right? And so all these little things like win, right? And even if you can't win on the reimbursement front, try to get the barriers down. All right, I don't want any authorizations for the first 15 visits, right? Like that's a cost there, right? A person on the phone or this and that, or your people, like that's a cost there, right? So like, even if I can't get a monetary value off of the eval visit or the follow-up visit or the reval, right? Just decrease the barriers to care because I want to see your patient faster, right? Because that's in their best interest. We have research that the faster they get into conservative care from the time that they get injured, they get better by a lot.
Right. I got to say to you, I love your viewpoint. You know, I think you have this sort of like optimistic view. If I had to describe your thinking after only knowing you for like 45 minutes, I think your brain is wired in a way where like every other joker is like, hey, here's 87 reasons why I'm going to make an excuse not to do something. And your brain is wired to be like, what's the one thing I got to figure out to get to the next step? I think that's super rare. And I really wish more practice owners would sort of embrace that because business at its core is supposed to be fun and profitable. And I think a lot of people forget that.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.